What if I told you there are situations where breaking the law isn't just forgiven, but it's actually the legally correct thing to do? Sounds kind of wild, right? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today, the whole idea of justification defenses.
And this question, this is really the heart of it all. Can breaking the law ever be the right choice? Not just excused or something we look past, I mean legally, and maybe even morally, the right call. The law, believe it or not, says, yeah, sometimes.
Okay, so to get this, we have to understand the huge difference between a justification and an excuse. An excuse, like insanity, basically says, yeah, the act was wrong, but this person shouldn't be held responsible. But a justification, that's way more radical. It says the act itself was not wrong. It was the right thing to do in that moment, something society would actually approve of.
So when a defendant claims they were justified, they're not saying, hey, I didn't do it. They're standing up and saying, oh yeah, I absolutely did it, and here's why it was the right decision. They're basically arguing that their actions, while technically a crime, were necessary to stop something much, much worse from happening.
Now, the most classic, the one we all think of first, is of course the right to protect human life. This is the bedrock of justification, the right to defend yourself or even someone else from a real and immediate danger. But for a self-defense claim to actually work in court, it can't just be a feeling. It has to stand on these three solid pillars. You had a reasonable belief you were in danger, that threat was imminent, like happening right now, and the force you used was proportional. So let's break down what those really mean.
And right away we hit a tricky part. Reasonable belief isn't just one thing, it's two. First, the subjective part. Did you, in your own mind, genuinely believe you were in danger? But that's not enough. The law then adds an objective test. Would a totally average, reasonable person in your exact situation have believed the same thing?
This whole idea was put under a microscope in a really famous case from 1984. A man named Bernhard Goetz shot 4 young men on a New York City subway. He said they were about to rob him. He was certain of it, based on their actions and his own past experiences. The entire case really came down to that one question. Was his belief reasonable?
You can see the problem the court had, right? If you only care about what the defendant believed, you could let someone justify violence based on totally paranoid fears. But if you only use an objective standard, you might ignore the real terror of the moment and the context only that person knew. So the law tries to find this middle path, blending personal experience with a standard of reason.
So the next big pillar is proportionality. And really, it's just about matching your response to the threat. The law draws a super sharp line here. You can only use deadly force when you're facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury yourself. You can't say pull a gun because someone is about to slap you. The scales have to balance.
Okay, so defending a person, that makes sense. But what about defending things? You know, your property. And what happens when you're stuck in a truly impossible situation where any choice you make means breaking the law? This gets us into what's called the greater good or necessity defense.
When it comes to just protecting your stuff, the rule is crystal clear. You are allowed to use reasonable, non-deadly force. You can stop a thief, you can prevent damage, but deadly force, never. The law says a human life is always, always more valuable than property.
But that simple rule leads us to one of the most intense and, frankly, dark scenarios you can imagine. Picture this: 4 sailors, shipwrecked. They're in a tiny lifeboat, thousands of miles from shore. No food, no fresh water. Days bleed into weeks. One of them, the young cabin boy, is on the verge of death from drinking seawater.
Now, this is a true story from a ship called the Mignonette back in 1884. And it poses maybe the toughest question the legal system has ever faced. To save themselves from starving to death, is it legally justifiable for the 3 healthier sailors to kill the weakest one and consume him? Is it legal to sacrifice one innocent person to save 3?
So what could they possibly argue in court? Well, their defense was something called necessity, or the choice of evils. They claimed they were facing 2 horrific options. Either everybody dies of starvation, or one person dies so 3 can live. They argued they simply chose the lesser of 2 evils.
So what did the court decide? A resounding no. In a decision that still echoes today, the court said the defense of necessity has its limits, and that limit is the intentional killing of an innocent person. The law, they said, cannot create a rule that allows us to weigh one innocent life against another.
All right, let's shift gears a bit. We've talked about emergencies, but what about justifications that aren't about life or death choices, but instead are about permission, either from the law itself or even from the supposed victim?
I mean, think about it. Some jobs actually require the use of force, right? The law gives certain people that authority. A police officer can use reasonable force to make an arrest, though there are very strict rules around deadly force. And in a similar way, parents are typically allowed to use moderate physical discipline, but again, there are clear lines you can't cross.
But here's a weird one. Can you consent to a crime? Well, sometimes yeah. If you step into a boxing ring or play hockey, you're consenting to a certain level of violence. But public policy draws a very hard line. You can never legally consent to being killed or to suffering serious bodily harm. The law just won't allow it.
Okay, let's wrap all this up by bringing it back to today's rules of engagement for self-defense, because where you live can totally change the rules you have to play by.
And this is where we get into a huge debate in the US today. Most states have what are called stand your ground laws. That means if you have a legal right to be somewhere, you have no duty to run away before using deadly force to protect yourself. But some states have a duty to retreat, which says you must try to escape, but only if you can do it with complete safety.
But there is one massive exception that pretty much everyone agrees on. It's called the castle doctrine. It's the ancient idea that your home is your castle, and inside your own home, you have no duty to retreat from an intruder before you use deadly force. It's a real cornerstone of self-defense law.
So after all this, here's the single most important thing to remember. A justification defense isn't about asking for forgiveness or mercy. It's a bold claim. It's a defendant saying, what I did was not a crime. It's the law itself admitting that in our messy, complicated world, sometimes breaking the rules is the only right and reasonable thing to do.
And that brings us full circle. Society, through its laws, has to draw a line in the sand between a justified act and a crime, between self-defense and aggression, between necessity and murder. It's a line that's always being debated and redrawn. So the final question for you is, if you were the one holding the pen, where would you draw that line?